All right. So Tyson wanted me to talk a couple minutes high level on if I was starting over or if I'm in the role of kind of field training someone part-time, what do we want to talk on? I think what I've experienced, just like all of you, when we came into business, the thought of contacting people for the first time was kind of intimidating, and so we kind of had a few different roles that we were told to work on, and we maybe spend our time more on the things that didn't help our business because it was comfortable. And so we tried to like kind of push our trainer away. And so what I've been working on with some of these people and what I'd recommend to folks if you're getting started is there's kind of three things you want to focus on when you're spending time in business hours. And business hours is time very dedicated to moving your business forward. So if you want to sit there and do study for your life insurance license while you're watching TV, that's fine to do on your downtime and in your off time. But when you're kind of in the game on time for business, what are some things that can move your business forward? And it's really simple. It's just getting in front of people and reaching out to folks to get them in front of our business platform. So what I'm recommending people do that are getting started is how can we get about 5 to 7 appointments added per week for the weeks coming. So we got to do contacting today to get 5 to 7 meetings for the next week because of those 5 to 7, about 3 to 5 are going to maybe actually stick. And of those, when we sit down with folks, we're quickly finding some want to do business right away and some are just looking for information and being an advocate. So in your roles that are trainers, or if you're just kind of listening to this for the first time, highly recommend front end activity is getting in front of people, having conversations, making those phone calls. Sounds obvious, but for those of you that are maybe new, one of the things that we look for in people is coachability, not because we want order takers, not because we want people to just follow our rules, but we have a proven system. We don't have this on the recording, but all of us are picking up hundreds of thousands of dollars right now, not because we've just sat back and waited, but because we reached out to people. So if you can systematically and routinely and consistently add 5 to 7 appointments per week to your calendar, that is going to allow for 20 to 25, even 30 appointments a month. You're going to be busy. And so that's just getting out there, having conversations on the phone, calling people with your trainer. And from there, that's where stuff's going to start to move forward. But we can do more in-depth things here, talk more on that at another time too.
Love it. Thanks, Alec. Let me share my screen here. Um, yeah, guys, this is just a never-ending process of contacting people and focusing on the key things. And just the one thing I'd add to that, summer looks different for all of us. We're all in different stages of life, different circumstances. But for any of us with kids, it's just a choppier schedule. There's little family trips. There's just everything's different week by week. And so I'm
Mm.
trying to have a mentality of really balancing, like I'm being intentional about time with my kids and hanging out at our pool and doing some fun stuff, but then squeezing in. And what I'm finding this summer for me, which kind of relates to being almost part-time in the business, is I don't really have full days right now that are unencumbered by needing to get a kid somewhere, pick up a kid, do whatever, right? And that's okay, right? That's part of the dream that I bought and fulfilled was I wanted to put myself in a position where I had the freedom to control my time. But that said, I have pockets of time, and I'm trying to be super intentional about, okay, I got a 2 or 3 hour pocket here, a 2 or 3 hour pocket there. One thing I'm doing is I'm chunking. For me, that works in my calendar is I'm getting my workout done early in the morning, and I'm getting certain things that don't involve like calling people out of the way early before kids are up and awake and all that, so that my 2 or 3 hour pocket of time during the day, or maybe another day it's 4 hour pocket of time that can be calling people, meeting with people in the office, you name it. And I'm really trying to max out my summer by doing that. And I think for part-timers, really think about that. Okay, where's a window of time I've got, and how can I maximize that window of time? And I will tell you, I feel great. Yesterday was just an example. I mean, I talked about two of those client meetings. I got a couple other important calls in, And I was only in the office for probably, I'm going to say 3 or 3.5 hours yesterday, but I just felt like, man, I nailed it. Like that was a really highly effective, block of time. And that's a win. And that builds my confidence and keeps my momentum and energy in the business and all that. So hopefully that's something you guys can take with you. I thought what I would do today. So what I want to spend time on is I want to get into life insurance and I want to come at it from a few vantage points. Okay. One is I want to, we'll probably do this for 2 to 3 weeks, or at least 2 additional weeks after today, maybe three. And I want to do kind of product training. So I want to cover for our newer people, some fresh material on, basics of term and IUL and VUL and term versus permanent, all that kind of stuff. But the second thing I want to do is I want to really help you guys understand, the resources that you have. And this gets to what Lisa's asking a little bit, like who do I call for this and who do I call for that? Because it's kind of a web out there of, what company do I go to here and what wholesaler do I contact there? But I think there are resources that we probably underutilize as a team in terms of trainings and different things. So I want to touch on that. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to get you guys in the habit of using resources that we've already created at your disposal that I know are underutilized. And so I'm gonna make a point of that today, which is before I was as I was getting ready for today's training, I was like, I know we've done a few rounds of kind of life insurance training before. And so we've really built a really nice video archive and I know by the video count, the view count, that they're not heavily viewed. And I'm not personally offended by that, but I just want to remind you that, having resources that aren't being utilized, ultimately just don't help you move forward. And I just want to show you guys where do you go for resources and get you a little bit more in the habit of because our library is extensive enough that I mean we've covered some big themes on products, big themes on contacting prospecting. There's some more nuanced things on mindset and mentality and how do you build confidence. And if I were you and I were part-time or full-time in the business, I wouldn't count watching any of our former trainings or videos. I wouldn't count that as activity any more than I would count studying for a test. But but I would really rethink if I were serious about this business, how can I start consuming content that's highly specific to what I'm trying to do in our business on a more frequently basis? So maybe, hey, could I be like listening to the audio version of this when I'm in my car commuting to my job instead of the radio? Instead of listening to watching random YouTube videos about who knows what, maybe I watch these and work into your calendar. Hey, I want to consume on a weekly basis, like one of these videos and start working our way through the library. Because I'm just telling you guys, there's magic in when there's a constant flow of content that's real highly specific to what you're doing coming in, it just sticks with you. Our brains and our world is too cluttered. There's just so much information just swirling around everywhere constantly that it's hard to stay focused on any one thing. And so just to double down on that, what I want to do today is I was going through I was on our page here and let's see here. So this training right here, why are we here? And intro to life insurance IUL. So the why are we here was just a kind of a topic of the day we were talking about. But this training was last August, so it's only a year old. But I'm gonna play this and we're gonna watch it together. It's 14 minutes. And the reason I'm playing this video is this is exactly what I would say if I were gonna do this live for you guys. And so, there are other videos that I highly recommend you go to. But I mean, guys, this thing has 6 views on it, right? And one of those is probably the one I'm in right now. So, I'm just telling you guys, like this is just part of winning. Like this is, man, we love to talk about the trips and the flashy things and the big wins and that should be celebrated. But man, we just never talk about the quiet stuff that it takes to win. Like what do you do when nobody's watching? And this is the kind of stuff that I think is so critical. So I'm just gonna kind of shift over and play, as painful as it is for me to watch a video of myself. I just want to kind of go through this live, and then we'll pick up at the very end for any questions and segue into next week. So here we go. Intro to life insurance. Here. So we're going to kind of do a segue or kind of tee the whole thing up today, and then get it kind of deep into the products. But I want to get into the idea of permanent life insurance. I want to get into IUL and GUL from lots of different standpoints, right? Would be from when do you use permanent, when do you use term, when do you blend both, to, you know, what are the pros and cons and attributes? How do you run illustrations on IUL and VUL? Why IUL versus VUL or vice versa? You know, what are the advantages of doing something like that? So there's a lot of elements to talk about. But I thought today, you know, our kind of conversation went a little bit longer, but just to kind of tee this conversation up and get into what I'd like to do is kind of get deep into IUL first, and then kind of segue into VUL, which is actually going to be a pretty quick transition because all of the changing in those products is really one mechanism, which is, you know, what's the cash value invested in. But the idea would be, let's start with this question. Why would somebody want or need permanent life insurance versus term life insurance? And I'm going to open this up and get some comments from you guys. But the idea would be, I don't, so of all the people I've talked to over the years, client wise, I usually kind of run into the same two ideas. Some people have this idea of, like, you know, they listen to Dave Ramsey, or it's what their dad always told them to do or something like that. And it's actually a minority of people. I mean, it's probably 10 or 20% of people. They're like, all we want is term. That's all we would ever do. We would never do anything with a cash value. Frankly, it's probably 10% of people out there. And for every person that says that, I probably have, on the other hand of things, I would never buy term. I feel like I'm throwing my money away. I'd only want it permanent insurance. That's probably, if there's like a bell curve, you guys know bell curve, right? Like the tails on both sides are probably pretty equal, believe it or not. But there's a whole lot of people in the middle, the 80% of people in the middle of that bell curve that, you know, basically don't know. And they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, what should we do? Or what are the pros and cons? And heard this, I've heard that, but not sure. And so that kind of leads to some of the questions. So what I'd ask you guys is, what do you guys think, just from a general standpoint, of why would permanent life insurance make sense versus why would term life insurance make sense?
I mean, permanent, yeah, it's always going to be there. You're covered for pretty much anything. Term, more or less, just in the event of an accident, it's going to sound very basic, but like, you don't want to leave your family high and dry in a position before you have the experience in life to get yourself into a position to have stuff. So it's just a safety net.
Yeah, it's a good start. Yeah, good answer. Anybody want to build on that?
Down to the clients and objective. Do they have a permanent need or a temporary need?
Okay. Explain to me what a permanent need might be.
Pension maximization.
Yeah. We'll certainly get into that element of it. Anything else?
Long-term planning.
Yeah. What do you mean by that, Rolla?
Well, there are people who are young with kids that might need a short-term planning for just to get them through until the kids are out of high school or college. And then you've got those who just want to make sure they have a permanent policy for, you know, them and their spouse, you know, long-term planning for their retirement.
Yeah, so think of it this way, all right answers. So the question becomes, is there a reason for this couple that to make sure there's some sort of policy that's always in place? You know, and what would that reason be? And so let's dismiss the reason. I mean, everybody, if the numbers didn't matter, if you just ask the question, would you rather, you know, own your policy or rent your policy? Would you rather have a policy in place when you're 85 and pass away or not? All else being equal, of course, everybody would say owner. It's the same thing in real estate. If you ignore numbers and you said, hey, would you rather own your house or rent?
I don't know anybody that say, well, I'd rather be a renter, right? But, the economics can dictate, right? Sometimes it makes more sense to rent, especially in a economy like ours right now, candidly. And sometimes it can make more sense to own, but I don't think it ever, this idea, back in the 90s, George W. Bush had this big thing where he's like, I want everybody to be an owner in this country. I should say late 90s, early 2000s. I want everybody to be a homeowner. Like that was his big thing. And that led a lot of people down a bad place. And 8 years later, we had a massive financial crisis. So just a blanket statement that like permanent life insurance is better, I don't agree with. I don't agree with the statement that permanent life insurance is superior, nor do I agree with the statement that term life insurance is superior. And there's a lot of people in our industry, and there's a lot of authors of books and radio hosts, gurus and all of that do have those opinions. And believe it or not, they're on both sides. There are people out there that think that whole life, you get all these infinite banking guys, you see a lot of that on YouTube, and they think that whole life is the way to go. And of course, there's a bunch of people that think term is the way to go. I love that we sit in the middle of all of that. And as consultants, as advisors, we can sit down and look at goals, look at priorities, look at needs, and figure that out. But I'll give you a couple examples of why somebody might need a permanent policy. Okay. One would be estate planning. There's a lot of cases where, maybe to pay taxes due or to fund a trust. And I don't want to get too down that wormhole, but you start running into people with, multi-million-dollar net worths, and maybe, they're on a trajectory towards being worth even more than that with compound growth. There could be reasons why we need to have a policy that pays a tax-free death benefit, whether you're 87 or 102 when you pass away. Another could be pension maximization, which we're going to get deep into that in one of these trainings. And we could talk about some cases that some of us have done recently. But the idea would be, hey, we need a permanent policy in place if we're going to make certain decisions about somebody's school teacher retirement pension or, public employee retirement pension. So that could be a really big thing. And we do a lot of that as a team. Another reason, I'm not necessarily a huge advocate, but in the right scenario can make sense, is if we look at a permanent life insurance policy is not just a life insurance death benefit, but also a long-term care pool of money. And so if somebody had a policy and, it's there for their spouse if they pass away, but it's also there for them if they go on, need in-home, assistance, healthcare assistance, or eventually go into a nursing home of some level, usually a graduated process. But you can look at most life insurance policies nowadays as basically like a simultaneous pool of money that, hey, we have $500,000 of death benefit and it's there if I die, but I can take out usually 2% of that death benefit, which would be $10,000 per month. I can take out towards any kind of long-term care need. And of course, that comes dollar for dollar off of the death benefit, but you're utilizing it. So that could be a reason somebody wants permanent life insurance. And then the last reason would be kind of more on the investment front. So less of a death benefit need, because some people that legitimately don't need life insurance at all. Most people do, even if it's just to cover final expenses and pay off debts, even if they're single. But there are definitely cases where somebody just doesn't need life insurance, right? They're single, they have assets, whatever. But even in those cases, somebody might look at the attributes of a permanent policy and say, hey, if I'm already maxing out my Roth IRAs or my 401k or you name it, and I'm down to either I'm funding a taxable account and paying tax every year on it, or I'm funding a life insurance policy and paying some life insurance cost, but I can build all the money tax-free. There can be attributes to a life insurance policy that you can get that you can't replicate on your own with an investment account. It's funny, I was just reading an article this morning, Schwab put it out, and the point of the article talked about, investing outside of your retirement plan. And I before I clicked on the link to read it, to me, the usual suspects would be like, tax efficient brokerage account and municipal bonds. And of course they talk about all that stuff, and they did mention annuities. They did mention the idea of investing in annuity and getting tax deferral on it. But I wasn't shocked, but maybe a little surprised. Usually there's like buried at the end, like, an investment grade life insurance policy, but it's usually with a bunch of caveats and talk to your advisor because it may not make sense for you kind of stuff. They didn't even list it on there. And you guys, it's a massive tool of high income and high net worth Americans is to utilize life insurance to shelter lots of money. And, anyways, and so we can do a lot of that for our clients. So there can be a lot of reasons for that. So we're gonna dive into. So the goal for next Tuesday is going to be, I want to start with IUL because everybody with a life insurance license can work with IUL. And we work with lots of different carriers, but I'm going to start with Nationwide. If I had to pick one primary carrier, Nationwide would be my primary carrier. I'm not married to that forever, and we'll get into some specifics why I like them. But they're reliable, they're well-designed products, their costs are very low compared to some competitors. And I love that I can simultaneously kind of pivot from an IUL to a VUL with them. And it's basically the same product design, just a different engine. But it's just a really competitive product out there. And of course, we get a ton of support on the sales end of things, underwriting, all that kind of stuff. And so it's a great baseline product to show you. But of course, we can work with lots of other carriers on IULs and a few with VULs. But definitely like their products. And so we're going to kind of show you that illustration, how to build the illustration, what it looks like. And we've already kind of covered terms. So I think that kind of is there. Anyways, I think that that's the game plan for the next couple of weeks. Is so we're going to start the recording earlier next week and get.
All right. So that gives you guys a little bit of an intro there. So my questions for you guys would be over the next couple of weeks, what are aspects of life insurance beyond the basic kind of cursory overview that you'd want to get into that you'd find valuable as we go through training?
I don't know if this would be applicable. I know Joe and I at one point we sat down and like went through an actual account statement, and it just took time to like walk through the numbers of how like for an IUL or VUL where you can like reassess with the client, hey, here's how all these charges work. I don't know if that would be something applicable to like look at an account statement and see how it's like 11 pages, but make it less confusing for us to then speak to our clients.
Okay.
It was like a scenario of it's, 5 years into an IUL kind of thing. How's this looking for me?
Yeah, one thing that we can definitely do that at the back end once we cover the product, but the main thing I would do is, that's why we have all those paper files and I mean, we're required to keep them, but I'll pull out the original illustration and compare that to, either online or a statement, and just look at the cash value, look at the premium. Are we ahead of schedule, behind schedule? That's been incredibly effective on client review meetings.
Yeah, so like do that. That
Okay.
exact thing.
I just did it, Joe.
Okay, well,
We'll do
with
it.
a piece of paper next time.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it.
I would love to learn more about the difference of when to write an IUL, VUL, or GUL, especially on people that are over 60, and when to do a blend and what that would look like. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty familiar with Nationwide, and I feel like we have more support with Nationwide than we do some carriers. So maybe even if I just learned one or two top carriers, that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, I think that could be a great training for next week, and we'll do more justice on it certainly. But really, it's as simple as the first letter in all those acronyms. Do you want it guaranteed? Do you want it indexed? Do you want it variable? So it just comes down to what's going to be the rate of return assumption in that policy. So anytime you want something guaranteed, you're going to pay a lot more for it, and so that's all a guaranteed UL is it's a universal life policy that the insurance company is figuring out, okay, we're gonna require the client to put more money in than we normally would, so that even in a super low return assumption, this policy isn't going to lapse. And so that's where, we'll do a deeper dive on, because this is where you get into and then you get into the whole life advocates and all of that, but understanding kind of what's guaranteed, what's not, and when does it matter. I think that's a great launching point for next week for sure.
Oh.
Anybody else?
This isn't out of a personal misunderstanding, but for the sake of the group and newer people, understanding like age and criteria thresholds of when you would go to Transamerica over North American to maybe Nationwide. Those are kind of the top three term carriers I think we've got, unless you've got kind of like a one-off. Like I just wrote a Prudential, for example, for a unique situation. So yeah, I've seen that a lot in the past year or two, is like there's kind of a break even there of when Transamerica falls off and North American is better for an older client.
Ryan, I'm going to task you with that. So
Okay.
we're going to have you do the term training, maybe the week after next. And what I give you a little time to prepare for it, what I'd like you to do is, I mean, the answer to your question is you got to run the quote, because like in companies are just when you think you've got it figured out that, okay, Nationwide's better for younger people and Trans is better for older people or whatever. It'll change when the carriers. I just think every time is about running the quotes. So your training could be how to run the quotes and where you go and get in the flow of all that. But then the other thing you could do is weave in the WealthWave Shop Your Term app to that, because that a lot of those carriers feed in, and we can talk offline about that a little bit. But that's something that we could be working in. And then the last piece I would tie into that term training would be the use of the WealthWave calculators, which we touched on a few weeks ago. But there's a great calculator on how much death benefit do you need, like a life insurance calculator. And sometimes that's really powerful. And you guys, and I'll call myself out on this. I've been doing this for so long that I'm just like, things make sense in my head, but like not for the first time my prospect, that like they don't know this stuff like I do. And so I'll skip some steps and I'll just say, well, we need 800,000 of insurance, and they might nod along like politely, but inside they're thinking like, well, that seems like a huge number. Why do I really need that? And I can do a better job at using that calculator in some meetings just to demonstrate, so people can really visualize. Okay, I get it. I need this much for my funeral. I need this much to pay off debts. We need this much for income. Like, it's not, it clicks, and then all of a sudden you have a lot more of a willing buyer. And so I think we could wrap all of that into like a term training that you can do here in a couple of weeks. So sound like a plan?
As long as it's not July 15th.
I literally was just about to say, because I know you got a trip coming up here. So we got next Tuesday's the 8th. Yeah, we're gonna need you to do that from vacation this season. So plan on you know what? I'm gonna be gone in I've got a market research project down in Mexico I'm doing with Leah. So just teasing, it's just a little getaway. We're gonna be researching tequila and beach access. So on the 22nd, I'll have you do that because I'll be gone, and then you guys can tackle that. So plan on that.
Noted.
All right. All right, you guys. Anybody else with any thoughts?
I just had a quick admin question while we got everyone here. Brian Sahanic is everyone's Crump contact, is that
I
right?
think so. I don't know exactly what his role is, but he's been a decent
Okay.
guy. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's been trying to do business with Crump, but I think that dude like has been let go or replaced, and I've been calling Brian Metzger directly. I don't know if anyone else is having experience who their touch point is there.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else does. Does Metzger get back to you?
He does, which yeah, he's very helpful, but I kind of saw him higher in the food chain and didn't like to bother him. I mean, I don't care, but
No, that's what it's for. I don't know that whole thing. I don't know how high that food chain really gets. Like,
okay.
I don't want to demean it. Crump's a great resource in a sense. Like, they're a great resource in terms of like they're a conduit to all of these providers and solutions. I don't think they're great at like the service end of it. And in that said, it's a really complicated business. So I don't know. It's a mixed bag, and so I think that's part of being an entrepreneur. Is sometimes you just got to cut through red tape and do what you got to do. So if you got to call Brian Metzger, who's like the national guy, to do what his subordinate should do, then that's what we do. So, well, cool, you guys. Let's wrap it there, and we'll get into this IUL, GUL, VUL, guaranteed versus non-guaranteed, permanent kind of conversation next week, and we will chat with y'all then. So let's keep our contacting going for the Grand Open.